Hello again. I've talked before about one of the less attractive aspects of immigration, which is that we are now required to show our passports or similar identification if we wish to rent a flat, sign up with an employment agency or open a bank account. These measures were all put in place because unscrupulous foreigners were coming to Britain and taking advantage of the traditional trust which existed here. There was a time when simply announcing your name and shaking a man's hand was sufficient to establish your identity. This is how I opened my first bank account, got my first job and rented my first bed set. Those days now seem as remote in time as the Battle of Jutland or the Corn Laws. I suspect that some viewers will also remember that situation though, when you could assume that somebody was honest and trustworthy unless you had firm indication to the contrary. What an awful thing it would have been to go through life believing that all the people you met were tricksters, frauds or criminals. That's what's happened now, and it's entirely due to the fact that so many foreigners have come to Britain. Some of the customs which foreigners have brought with them have been to our advantage, of course. Where would we be without Indian restaurants or corner shops which open all hours, for example? On the other hand, many of the habits and ways of behaving which have been imported over the last half century or so have not been so desirable. I'm thinking about such things as hacking a man to death with a machete because you feel he looked at you in the wrong way, driving up on the pavement and seeing how many pedestrians you can mow down, and of course conducting large-scale electoral fraud so that you can ensure that your favourite Bengali politician is voted in on the local council. I've been voting for a very long time, so long in fact that the first general election in which I voted, it was the choice between Ted Heath and Harold Wilson. Every single time I've just turned up at the polling station with no ID, tell the person who I am and what my address is, and that's that. This system has worked well in Britain ever since democracy began. I would have said that it was a fundamental feature of our elections. The problem, of course, began in places like Tower Hamlets in East London and also certain towns in the north of England. In these areas, large numbers of Bangladeshis settled and brought with them from their own country a lively tradition of electoral fraud and intimidation. Britain, having no experience of such practices, was ripe for having its electoral system corrupted, and Tower Hamlets in particular became a byword for fraud during elections. This was done either by proxy votes, in which women were discouraged from voting and allowed their husbands to vote on their behalf, and also by postal voting. Misrepresentation at the ballot box was also rife, in other words, a person pretending to be somebody else. It is solely to tackle irregularities in Bangladeshi areas that the Electoral Integrity Bill is being brought in. It will be announced in the Queen's speech in the spring, and the intention is that it will be in place before the next local elections in 2023. There's no problem anywhere else in Britain other than a few constituencies with large numbers of Sylheti-speaking voters. The fact that it is often women's votes which are being stolen in this way by bullying men is a scandal. However, all those who make such a fuss about women's rights and all the rest of it dare not complain about this for fear of appearing racist. In other words, women are being deprived of the franchise and no one on the left will say a word about it. The obvious solution to the problem, since it is confined to areas with lots of Bengalis, would be to crack down on electoral malpractice in those areas. But again, no one wants to look racist by singling out one particular ethnic group or any particular area. The result is that every single person in Britain will now be treated as though he is potentially engaging in fraud. It will from 2023 be necessary to show a passport or driving licence to prove your identity, or you will not be allowed to cast your vote. In this way, centuries of democratic tradition are thrown on the scrap heap because of the behaviour of some immigrants. Welcome to modern Britain. In the description to this video, I give a link to a newspaper article describing the new bill.